Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Do support the transmission. It's crucial, and the best way you can do that is by becoming a paid subscriber on the Substack. A little over $9 a month, or a little over $90 a year. We do private weekly group Zoom chats with paid subscribers to shoot the breeze. I do a weekly roundup of the news and commentary for subscribers only, and sometimes we bring back live past guests for a live Q&A. You can also donate through Buy Me a Coffee, Donor Box Wise, and other options are on the website, geopoliticsandempire.com. You can also purchase a consult if you want to chat with me about expatriating, podcasting, geopolitics, or the meaning of life. And our sponsor this month, of course, is Mikkel Thorp's Expat Money Summit, taking place online for free October 7th through the 11th. They'll be talking about internationalization, purchasing foreign real estate, getting your second or third foreign residency or passport. Most of the speakers there have been guests on the podcast: Ron Paul, Mark Faber, Scott Hornbeck, Casey, and so forth. I'm also participating in the conference. You do have to register, so the link is in the description. And if you use the promo Empire, you'll get $100 off the VIP upgrade. And check out my affiliates and leave a podcast review if you have not already. Joining us for the first time on Geopolitics and Empire is Kate Mason of the fantastic Substack, kate739.substack.com. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed what I've seen of your work, so I appreciate having a chat to you.
Likewise, you're doing really. I've seen some of the interviews that you've given and the deep dives. You've been doing your analysis on your Substack, and unfortunately, it's one of my favorite topics. Basically, what's this whole Great Reset agenda, the algorithm ghetto agenda, as I like to say, and you've been really looking at the nitty gritty. And to start, I guess people know I like to start big picture and drill on down, and so, just to get your thoughts, especially because you're out down under in Australia, I believe, so you can give us from that vantage point, tell us what's going on there as well. But what's your sort of whole take as to what's going on, who's doing it, why are they doing it? We often throw out the terms Great Reset, the digital gulag, Agenda 2030, 15-minute cities, and so forth.
There's a lot going on in Australia, and I do not at all think I'm anywhere near all over. I guess I've been trying to map things and see how it fits together over time. So it takes a while to be able to piece those areas together. But my main focus has been on digital ID, which is really heating up in Australia, smart cities and the resilient cities, what's happening in Australia, which is going to start rolling out next year, big time, with managed retreats, so the removal of property and infrastructure based on extreme climate change modelling, and and just the threats to private home ownership that are coming through with upgrades to houses. I've just finished an article on that today, and I don't know if I mentioned food. I've really focused on what they're doing with food as well. So they're my main and the wellbeing agenda and the social impact agenda, and how philanthropists are going to be impacting on us and funneling us through programs and our children through programs. So they're my main things, but I can see all of those coalescing perfectly for their plans, or for the plans, where a lot of stuff's going to hit us next year. So we've got the farmers, there's the massive rollouts of renewables all over Australia, and farmers are trying to push back because it's going to be going through their land. Australia is going to be a critical mineral superpower. So I think that's playing into undercover under a lot of the property ownership threats that are in place. They're making a nature repair market, which I'm yet to have a proper look at, but it will be the commodifying of nature and the ecosystem services. So I just see this awful, awful storm coming, and they're building like crazy, as they would be in every country, under the guise of not enough housing. And they're incentivizing, companies like Blackstone to come into the market and do their build to rents. So what I'm seeing is just it's going to become incredibly difficult to hold on to private home ownership. And then you'll be needing to move into resilient, smart cognitive city areas, because, cities are somehow more resilient than living. And we live all along the coast. I can't remember the percentage, but a huge amount of Australians live about 7 kilometres from the coast. And so all of that area is seen as high risk because of, disaster, climate change modelling in the future. So they're going to start moving people, and they need to move people into somewhere. So I guess it's going to be incremental, but there's a lot of building going on. So I'm seeing all of that, plus the digital ID is heating up. So currently, Bill Shorten, which is a politician, announced the TEX trusted exchange for digital ID, which will be rolled out next year, and said things like, it's just the digital thumbs up from the government that you are who you say you are. So that will be to enter clubs, to be able to access services. And digital ID bill, the legislation was only passed in May of this year, and it's got, this is going to be voluntary. And then there's 3 clauses underneath it, which unless, which means that, and now they're just rolling out this stuff. So the text will be, you have to prove yourself. And then they've got the government's very concerned about children accessing social media. So just yesterday I had a look at that, every time you hear what the government's doing, you're like, I have to look for what it is. And that's so they can implement all the facial technology and voice technology, recognition technology, and a digital ID for children to be able to access the internet. But it also explicitly says it will be for, it can potentially be used for over 18s as well. So, and then the other day, the Food Body put out, they finished their public submissions. They're going to allow GMOs into the food sources without any labelling or safety testing. So we actually won't know. It'll be an organic food. There's no way of kind of knowing, once it sort of really gets into the market. So that's where we're really up to. Every government plan in Australia is basically a United Nations plan, reworded slightly. And it's been in process for a very, very long time, and too many of us have not been paying attention to what's happening.
And, for me, this is the number one topic of everything that I look at, from wars in different theaters or around the world to economy. I mean, this is, as you just outlined, it's in Australia, United States, Europe, Russian Spare Bank is building out smart cities. Just this past 2 weeks in Mexico, they've announced the rollout of 15-minute cities. And essentially, it's like they don't have enough prisons to put us all into. And so they're bringing the prisons to us, and they're creating a ghetto. And it's going to be, it's going to have like a digital circuit around it. And we can add further things like geolocation, geofencing. So again, if we have the digital ID and digital currency, if you physically leave your zone, you won't be able to purchase anything. It's that simple, really. Or it's all of those sci-fi. I'm playing a sci-fi dystopian video game right now, Atomic Heart. I think it's made by the Russians, but it's really frightening, and it's really accelerating everywhere. And so, what are your thoughts if this all comes together? What would life be like in this, digital farm?
What's it going to look like? Well, we're going to have to be. It's going to be very hard not to be injected with everything every time you turn around. It's going to be synthetic food. It's the tracking and tracing of everything. I'm particularly concerned about the children. So in Australia, our treasurer is like, what really gets me is the virtue signalling. So there's so much virtue signalling in Australia. They're trying to sell all of this, and because they're basically commodifying everything. So things you couldn't commodify before, like children or education, to the extent you've got private schools, but you still have public schools. Children, interventions into families, they're commodifying every single thing. They're commodifying every vulnerable person. They're making a market off them under social impact bonds. And the amount of virtue signalling really gets me. Like, our treasurer puts out these ridiculous sort of thesis on democracy after the crisis and how we're reaching the end of capitalism, and now we're in a new form of capitalism where you put value before value. You put values before value. So it's like, this is what it is. And they make this, COVID, everyone came together, and it's all about values now, even though the massive wealth transfer happened during COVID. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about that they're going to privatize all the infrastructure and all the massive disaster infrastructure that's going to start getting rolled out is going to be privately owned, and BlackRock's just bought a massive global infrastructure company and saying governments are broke, this is our next big investment boom. No, that's all not talked about, and that private home ownership is just going to become completely unaffordable for the vast majority of people. No, it's about values. And so I think the thing that really concerns me about children is they're going to get children. So this, I was looking at it a while ago, but there's this global curriculum that they want to roll out, school curriculum, and number one is climate change, and then there's activism, and there's about 5 points they want every child to be sort of taught and be under, and it will be so manufactured and so synthetic. And that's what worries me, if they catch these children and do this. And, the inner development goals for the sustainable development goals, where you basically just have to become this mouthpiece. I'm doing this for the sustainable development goal, number 2. It's, so this is what I'm really concerned about, because there's too many people going along with it. There's too many activists actually fighting for this system when they don't know what they're doing.
I mean, that's been my experience. I taught at the top schools in Mexico and Kazakhstan, and the administration, the educators were all pushing exactly what you just said: SDGs, Model UN, and no one bats an eye. Everyone was just going along. I was literally the only teacher there discussing how the UN is this tyrannical world government. And no one's questioning anything. And that's the scary part. It's just steamrolling ahead. I had a recent guest, an academic out of the UK, and we talked about, we call this liberal globalism. The teachers, she teaches in the UK, and she's speaking out against the foreign policy of foreign interventions. And she's like, everyone else are lemmings. She actually said they have this syndrome of how I learned to love NATO, basically. So whether it's the military industrial complex or what you're talking about, and there's just so many things that are going on here. Let me ask you about the housing. That's something I've been talking about. I was just even talking to people here in Mexico, like even to rent now, it's becoming very unattainable for average Mexicans now. The rents are just skyrocketing, and this is a global phenomena. And I think that latches onto what you're talking about, where they eventually want to kick us out of home ownership. And we've been seeing this in the UK, right? With the green policies in the UK, where they're forcing people to spend tens of thousands of dollars, or they will be soon, to upgrade their homes. And then if you can't do that, I guess your home is what? Illegal, and then you lose it. And so, and let's not forget, I think we had almost a decade ago, the UN Climate Summit here in Cancun in Mexico, where in that paper, they actually discussed forced relocation, right? Kind of what you're talking about in Australia. And so what are your thoughts maybe on that point of when it comes to the housing? I think what they're doing is they're attacking the middle class. So again, they want this neo-feudalism of just the elites and the plebes. And so barely anyone can afford to own a home. They're either renting or, using UBI, government subsidized funds to have a place to live. And so what are your thoughts on their grand plan when it comes to housing?
Okay, so in Australia, an act was passed for New South Wales. I'm in New South Wales. So an act was passed in 2022 that if the minister thinks that there is a potential disaster, so all of this is preemptive, so thinks there's a potential disaster area, primary or secondary, for a whole bunch of disasters and secondary effects, they can take your land. They can compulsorily acquire your land and kick you off, and then they can do what they want with your land and on-sell it. And we had a disaster adaptation plan coming out in February this year for New South Wales, and it explicitly states one of the ways that they might do this widespread managed retreat for New South Wales, and the policy will be out next year. Private corporations can help people move, and then they can get the land in return. I mean, that's pretty blatant. I thought it was going to be more rewilding stuff, and then they can sort of invest in the nature and sort of, own it over the top. So we've got that. And so the other thing we've got is all our local councils are broke. So our local level of government, so they cannot even afford to pay infrastructure like the roads. So we're at an infrastructure cliff. I'd say it's the same story for most countries. We're at the infrastructure cliff. Our infrastructure needs a reboot, just ordinary. Then next year, they're going to bring into the local councils. I imagine it'll be next year, disaster planning. So you've got to get all your infrastructure for disaster resilience up and going. So the local council sort of New South Wales body wants to uncap rates, which means people's rates will go up on their land to pay to live in the area. Then you've got the disaster adaptation infrastructure, which we're going to have to pay for as well. You've got the managed retreat hanging over your head because they make it very clear that this is incremental. You just don't know. So, even though it can start with these things, there could be trigger points where you have to go into managed retreat. So as soon as you do that, no one's got any assurance this is a good place to invest in anymore. So you've got all of that. Our interest rates are really high and people are already falling out of the market because of that. So there's probably more that I'm just not recounting right now. But today I've just spent the day looking at all the plans to put an energy rating, same as what you're talking about in England. It'll be out next year or most probably hit the ground running into 2026, where they're saying our housing, they're saying 90, I think it's 98% of existing house stock's going to have to be upgraded to be climate ready. So this is also based on climate change modelling. So you've got to get your houses disaster. It's not just making it energy efficient. It'll morph into making it resilient for disasters, which is a whole nother ball game. So I was just looking at that, and it's double glazed windows, and what's your house clad in, and your insulation on your roof and your ceilings and your walls and your floors and the paint on the outside of your house. And you've got to have renewable energy and a battery. And, so many things. And if we're looking at the average homeowner or a retiree, how are they going to do that? And then because that'll be made explicit that's got to be on your house. So you can't rent a house out unless it's got all of that. It'll have to have a certain star rating to be rented out. Plus, if you're living in the house when you go to point of sale, that will be front and center. So it's just let's just get it all ready for this housing crash. And we'd have plenty of the corporations just sitting there waiting to gobble these houses up at a very low price. And then so people are going to probably fall out of the property market and not be able to get back in.
I mean, I'm just picking up these signals everywhere. I'm also Croatian, and I saw this week there was no property tax in Croatia. They just brought it in. And first, it's going to be only for property owners who rent. If you live in your property, you don't have to pay. But you can bet your bottom dollar that they're going to add that later, and then it's just going to increase the amount. And it's and what you're detailing, people are living fine for years and decades in their homes without all of this stuff that that they want us to use. It's not necessary. It's a total sham, and it's interesting. I had a recent guest. When we talk about who's behind this, I'm warming up to the idea that the City of London, because the British Commonwealth, Australia, New Zealand, England, U.S., Canada, that's really the ground zero for a lot of this stuff. And so, King Charles III, he came out a few years back talking about we need a global military Marshall Green sort of plan, and it seems like that's what's going on. I'm curious as to your thoughts on the local mechanics when it comes to this stuff. You mentioned the local government, looking at the mayors, the state level governors, and how this sort of international public-private structure has plugged in. Because I've been trying to figure that out here in Mexico. Because again, this agenda is rolling out in all countries, and here in Mexico, you've got the local governor, and I've mentioned before, they've got the Rockefeller Foundation financing the city that I live in, the state with these projects. I'm sure BlackRock is there behind the scenes. United Nations, as you've mentioned, the UN is here. Their different agencies are pushing the education UNESCO curriculum. And the other agencies are, the WHO is pushing its health agenda here in Mexico. And so, what are your thoughts? As how do they interlink? We get it at the national level with the prime minister, but when you have local mayors pushing this globalist agenda, how do you sort of how does that work in your mind?
Well, there's some direct ones like ICLEI that are on the, where the UN goes down into local council. So we have some of the councillors and mayors involved in ICLEI around Australia. But there's quite a few. I haven't really had a good look at that for a while, but there's Covenant of Mayors. There's quite a few different groups. It'd be interesting to see how many are these global groups that
I think also like C40 now, you get like the 40,
yeah, we've got
different
C40.
mayors.
We've got C40 with the mayors. We've got Resilient Sydney, which was, I think, around 2015. So that's created. So that, as you said, that's Rockefeller funded, or was just the initial part, and got it set up. And so all the Sydney councils have all amalgamated into this Resilient Sydney network. So they'll be all under the Rockefeller, framing of what's happening. And, Rockefeller, I don't know if it was Rockefeller Foundation themselves, but somewhere along the line, the meaning of resilient was changed. So it's no longer like, okay, there's a particular threat and we need a strategy for that particular threat. It's like, we're going to compound everything that could potentially happen, and then we don't know if it's going to happen or not, and it's not about trying to save assets, it's about something else. So it becomes this just arena where basically they've got an open slather to do whatever they want. And it also means there's no end game. It's like this wicked problem that no matter what we do, we probably can't get anywhere with it. So we can just keep, enforcing more and more layers of this. So yes, I don't know exactly. I'd say some of them are captured. I don't know. I doubt many would have even done the work I've done. And I think that's really, really not okay to be sitting in official positions and not do any of your own research and just probably not even read the papers, probably just read the little blurbs that are given. Like I've noticed with the New South Wales Adaptation Plan that came out in February, I can't remember, it's like 100 pages or more. And then I looked it up and they've got one for councillors and staff and council, and it's like 2 pages and doesn't even mention managed retreat, and managed retreats all through the bigger plan. So I don't know how many are just, what would you call that, incompetent and really doing the public a disservice because they're not having a look. And then there would be some people that are placed. There would be. A lot came in and I haven't gone right back to when all of this Australia became so captured. Maybe we always were, but we did have a prime minister in 2015. I think he was a Goldman Sachs banker. He was a very high up banker and came through in the Liberal Party. He enacted a lot of what we're starting to see now, the smart city plans, and we also became part of a massive global megacity. So I live in a lovely area, which is, an hour and a half out of Sydney, and you wouldn't think it's a global city, but a year ago, I think it was, they created this whole massive area, so we're a global megacity, and they call it a smart global megacity. So I think, I mean, there's a master plan somewhere, and it really annoys me. It's like I'd like to see that master plan of where they expect people to live, in what sort of time frames, how they're going to build enough. How's this all fitting together?
Yeah, that's been my view, because I studied diplomacy. I was in Geneva. I was, I guess, rubbing elbows with some of the elite, and my impression is it's a mix where you've got useful idiots, incompetent apparatchiks. The ranks are stuffed with them, so that's definite. And you most definitely have people who are agents who are placed, as you said, directing things when they go slightly off kilter. And so you've got a mix of both of those. I'm sure you've got people who are just politicians most of them are narcissistic and just want fame and fortune and prestige. And so I'm sure there's some that see something going on, but they just look the other way. And rubber stampers, a lot of these folks, I've been around them, they're just rubber stampers. They'll just stamp whatever to keep their position, pay, and prestige. You gave an interesting talk a while back about your thoughts as to a future pandemic, how they would react, and you had an interesting, I think, thesis. I think you talked about a targeted approach, and something we saw recently, Alice Springs, I believe, Australia, where there was some violence, some crime, and I love the way they framed it: snap curfew, snap lockdown with new special powers. It's like diktat, and I'm like, I live in a narco state, basically, Mexico. We got a lot worse violence than Alice Springs, and we're not locking down, And so I think what they're doing is just normalizing martial law, basically this state of emergency, state of exception. And first it's health reasons for locking it down, then it's crime. It's kind of what you said earlier. It's an open book. It's the forever war, right? It's the arena is so wide. So crime, then it's going to be climate. In Mexico City, they're already doing climate lockdowns. Some days you can't drive your car,
Wow.
and so your thoughts on whether they can pull a COVID 1984 again? I kind of think they do. I think most people would go along, or they would have enough of a critical mass to sort of half pull it off again. So your thoughts on that, and your thesis of them doing a more targeted approach?
My thoughts on whether or not people would go along with it again.
Well, yeah, if they could pull off another sort of COVID lockdown scenario, whether it's bird flu or monkeypox or whatever, and then how they might do it.
I think they would be able to pull it off again, even like a full scale, widespread. I think I might be wrong. I'm not saying I'm right with that. I just don't think enough people understood what happened. I mean, even in my own sphere, I just don't feel. I've had a few people say you were right, or I'm sorry, I took the response to you because I just wouldn't go along with it, and I did get some vitriol at the time. So I've had. But it's there's plenty of people that still will. There's plenty of people still hooked into the ABC and just watching that and regurgitating, which drives me nuts. But yeah, I'm not sure that there'd be enough people who would say no. I think people are something kind of dampened down in people. Like, there's not the spirit that I would have thought. So I'm sure more people would say no, but you have to kind of in Australia, I had to completely give up my career, and lots of people had to do things like that. People had to lose homes. You've got to do a lot. It's not just like a small thing that you've got to do. So there's that, but I don't believe necessarily, and I'm not saying I'm right. I don't have any inside knowledge, but I don't think they're going to need to do the widespread lockdowns. And when I was listening to someone from the WHO, they were pretty much saying that as well. The way that they've been so upfront in media and different politicians going, oh yeah, we didn't factor in all the harms being caused that our policies did. Our policies of mass lockdowns for years and ruining businesses and, ruining children's schooling and stuff like that. So there was a paper that came out a couple of years ago in Australia called Fault Lines, and the public, the people that were, stood up against COVID were like, oh, this is a fantastic report, because they only read the newspaper article that was talking about it. It was like lockdowns were really detrimental. They harmed people and blah, blah, blah. But I read the document, and it's basically calling for targeted surveillance. It's just calling for surveillance, and it's calling for targeted lockdowns. So it implies that there's a CBDC, because it's like you can track people through where they've spent money. Then you can get in touch with them. They're locked down until they've had the vaccine. So you basically just lock components of people down. You do the most vulnerable again, and you also do, and then you probably go into a town, and so anyone that lives in that community gets locked down, until they've all been vaccinated, and then you move on. So that's what they're going to do. It's not going to, and that's very devious and problematic, because it means, I've watched in Australia, so they killed all the bees in New South Wales, or a huge amount of bees in New South Wales, because of the varroa mite. So, these biosecurity threats where they just keep poisoning and killing everything in Australia. Nobody really got involved until it happened to their bees, So this is this thing where you can kind of not, really isolate people and just go in on them. And it's hard for other people, the mass lockdowns meant that a mass uprising did actually happen. So that's what I think they're going to do.
It actually makes perfect sense, because then what you just said, if you have across the board lockdown, you'll have across the board uprising. But if you do it, it's almost like a military tactic, kind of like what, during World War II, what this, the Nazis might do, or what comes to mind is the Einsatzgruppen, these special extermination forces. And on one hand, if you do it, town by town, or region here, region there, it's kind of invisible. Like people don't feel that it's happening on the one hand, while it is. So that's a great sort of deception there. And I mean, this is truly frightening. It makes me think of that that insane movie that they put out, Songbird, I think during COVID, where you had to take your temperature every day on the phone, and if you had a fever, they come and basically rendition you to extermination camp. And so I think you're right, because the technology is now catching up. So it's like what they did in the 2020s was the first phase or iteration, and now I think they're learning from it. And they still need some time to develop, I think, to flesh out the digital ID systems, the CBDC systems, and whatever other technology they'll be onboarding. Some of the Asian countries, I think it was Indonesia, if I'm not mistaken, they brought back into the airports all of these thermal scanning stuff where you have to now fill out a health declaration when you go there. And so I think they're slowly building in those foundations. The digital ID. So I think this is also key. If people follow Biometric Update and other websites, every country now is bringing in digital ID, and I think they're going to force you to have a smartphone. It's crazy because now one by one in many areas I've seen things drop where I came back from Kazakhstan. The bank here in Mexico, I used to have the token. I didn't like using my smartphone, so I would log on the computer with the token they give you to access your bank account. They eliminated it. And I even asked the lady, like, when I come back, I didn't have a Mexican phone number. I'm like, I just have my Kazakh phone number. And she's like, sorry, like, too bad. I don't care. You have to get the smartphone app or you can't access your bank. Or just other examples that are slipping my mind right now. Or the two-factor authentication, the one that I was using the computer version. They just dropped it. And that forces me now to have a smartphone for my two-factor authentication. So that'll link to your digital ID. And so your thoughts on how that's going to play out?
I agree with you. I think they want the next pandemic, or the big one that's going to come to all the countries, will be after the infrastructure's in place. I don't think it will happen before, but again, I could be wrong. Yeah, no, definitely. Our digital ID is just sitting there waiting until it becomes, it's like in the Act, it says something like the businesses that are exempt are small businesses, so they can ask for digital ID, and any business that has exclusively either like booking services online or you access the services online, they can ask for a digital ID. So as we're in the fourth industrial revolution and everything's digitalized and more of our access to goods and services is through the internet, they can just, and mostly you do have to book things online now, so basically there's a free for all anyway that the businesses can bring in a mandatory. And then the third one is unexpected situations. So because we're in an era of rolling crises, that's going to be anything. So yes, it's all going to the digital ID will come mandatory as soon as there's a pandemic that's potentially of risk to Australia, potentially. So that's when it will kick in, and we will be, and it's going to be really hard because the people who don't want to get caught in this are probably not going to leave the house very much. Like we're going to be really careful about where we go and what we do and how we access services because we don't get caught in it. So, it'll have a good impact on even isolating people who are concerned.
I think that's a good point that I haven't heard many people bring up. You'll be relegated to your homes. I mean, just the latest crazy example here in Mexico, there's still a lot of stuff that's analog and tortillas, right? For the tacos, daily food for many people. And usually you pay with cash. And I just read this week, the 18,000 plus tortillerias, now they're bringing in digital payments. So it's just like, it's incredible. So you can pay with your phone now to buy your tortillas. And what you just said, though, I think the key point is, I don't think you'll be able to function in society because for all public or private service, you're going to have to use the digital ID. And I think, I don't know if you've thought about this. In the beginning, everything will probably be fine. But as this system gets put into place, if you become a thought criminal, then your access will probably end up being more and more denied, no?
Yeah, I think so. And we've got the misinformation and disinformation bill about to be passed and being debated. I haven't had a good look at it. I haven't had the time. But there will be penalties to that as well, what's considered misinformation. And I think they talk about malinformation. So I'm somebody, I was like, well, how are they going to get someone like me? Because I like 95% of what I do is show their documents. I've got no interest in having my own opinion on it. It's like, well, this is in the documents. So that's where my understanding is malinformation is where you say things that are factual, but you craft a certain narrative with it that they find of concern. So yeah, how that's all going to look. It's tricky. I'm not quite 100% sure regarding, like if you say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, but you cancelled over here anyway. Like you're fired. Different people have been fired if they even just say they just believe in biological sex. They've been fired for that. So I guess we're seeing that sort of thought crime rolling out. I guess that's a form of thought crime.
I mean, yeah, that's happened in Ireland. Enoch Burke, if I'm not mistaken, he was, I think, a high school teacher or some kind of teacher. They arrested him at his home for not bowing down to the gods of transgenderism here in Mexico. Again, a lot of people think this is relegated to the English-speaking West, but it's happening now everywhere. And so in Mexico, a politician had to, the government charged him for calling a man a man. And so I shared this the other day. I don't know who Michael Arbon is, but he shared this tweet about in Australia this combating misinformation and disinformation bill, and he said it's an Orwellian nightmare with severe consequences for freedom of expression. And he said it's not just an anti-democratic piece of legislation; it is anti-human. And just looking at photos of these Australian politicians passing this, I mean. I'm trying to look into their eyes, their faces, like their souls. I mean, totally. I mean, shame, absolutely shame on these people. I mean, I don't know what they are thinking and whatever benefits they might be getting now, but they're building a digital dystopian hell for their children and their children's children. And I think we're talking about all these pieces that come together. The smart city aspect, the digital ID. I haven't got your thoughts yet on the digital currency and the misinformation bill. So that's thought crime. And so that is really what will, I think, set off these hate speech laws that are now being legislated in the West. That's going to be the one that will legally allow them to, I guess, unplug you from the system. Any thoughts on the cashless society, like the CBDCs and whatnot?
I haven't looked at that for a while. There was the trials going on, and I thought it was meant to be launched maybe actually the years are going by. I haven't looked at it for about a year. I thought it was going to sort of be piloted probably middle of last year, but I haven't kept my finger on the pulse as to where that's up to, actually. I need to go back and have a look at where Australia's up to, but definitely in progression. Definitely.
Do you have any thought on crypto and Bitcoin? My thesis from the beginning has not changed. Call me crazy, but I think Bitcoin was the elites themselves who created it as a way to sort of kickstart the road to CBDC. I don't know if you have any thought on that.
I don't know enough about crypto, but I've listened to Alison McDowell talk about it, and I don't know if you know her, Wrench in the Gears, and she does a lot around her concerns around crypto.
She's been a guest on the podcast, yeah.
Yeah, so she was like somebody I really appreciated finding early on, especially about the social impact bond stuff. No, I've never been part of crypto, so it's quite hard for me, the blockchain and understanding it, but I just see how all these sort of blockchain currencies are cropping up and, in the freedom movement, and I am wary of it. I'm really wary of where this is leading, and I've heard that thought before, that this was set up, Bitcoin was set up just to, prepare people for this entry into, being blockchain, basically. And so, yeah, and I don't like the fact that, in America, Kennedy's talking about blockchaining the health system. And I'm just like, what's going on? I'm not comfortable with it, but I haven't spent the amount. I try not to talk too much about things I don't really understand. But something's wrong. Something doesn't sit well with me in the whole thing. And it's almost like everyone's just gone, oh, well, it's happening anyway. We have to choose the good side of it, And I'm like, why are we accepting this? How have we gone from no one even knowing about it to accepting it so quickly?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of it. I accept crypto because I feel like it's a guerrilla war, and in a guerrilla warfare, the gorilla is not going to, if there's an AK-47 lying around or an American weapon, they're going to use it. And, if I think in that way, our money is fiat currency from the, same globalist Federal Reserve, or most of the things that I own are from their companies. And so I'd have to basically live in a shack in the woods. And so I'll use what I can for now, but ultimately this is not, as you say, I believe all this blockchain stuff and crypto is part of their plan. And, other people like Catherine Austin Fitts say the same. And so I'm just not a fan of that stuff. And you have also talked about, just going back to food for a moment, and I think you've also touched on eugenics on your Substack. You did an interview, Eugenics Exterminating the Poor. And I think a lot of the ideology behind this Great Reset, this 15-minute city, this algorithm ghetto, is population control based eugenics, and food is part of that. They want to get rid of meat, right? And then I think ultimately, I could honestly see them doing full-on Soil and Green, where they just feed us humans, cannibalism. And so your thoughts on some of these themes, eugenics and the attack on food?
Okay, so I saw recently in Victoria, in Melbourne, they're doing this 2-year so I've been looking at the impact investors a lot. We've got a huge amount of philanthropists making and the Australian government's very kindly setting up the market for them to be able to intervene in families' lives and children's lives and make a profit return off them. So I was fired from welfare, and I worked with, children and families and lots of different, and I worked in community development. And so I was horrified because I stood up against the mandates and talked about the harms that were being caused to people, especially the most vulnerable people. And then to find out that there was a market being made on people that were in these positions. So the government's gone in, enacted policies that have harmed a huge amount of people and made people more vulnerable. And then secondly, they've got a market being set up for extraordinarily wealthy philanthropists to intervene and get like 10% profit a year on the interventions. And so that was and that's where Alison McDowell kicked in for me. But that was actually really devastating to find that out. So I'm sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent. What did you ask me again?
Just your how you see as part of their machinations, their plans, the food element. What are they trying to do? And then I think the eugenics element as well.
So I'm talking about the eugenics. That's where I went. So I just found out in Victoria that for these philanthropists are funding a project with a hospital where over a 2-year period, they go in once a woman's given birth in a hospital, and they approach her just as, like the day after she's given birth or something, and ask her to be part of this project. And it collects the DNA of the baby, the DNA of the mother, the DNA of the father, any sort of pregnancy, DNA samples and everything else. And then they can collect, the education level they can collect any of the health services that the mother or father went to and any information about them and their educational outcomes and blah, blah, blah. And then they follow the child through their life. And I didn't see it to what point it ends, but, it's preschool, it's school. So it's all health, it's mental health, it's, it's physical health, mental health, then how well they do socially, how well they do in education, etc. So, and they can ring the teachers or whatever and ask them any questions they want. So they don't, you don't even know what they're asking. So, and then they collect all that data and they store it, especially the biological data, and they store it in somewhere there, and it can be used for any other research. So I was really horrified when I heard that. I'm like, well, they're combining genetics with your mental health and your physical health and your educational outcomes. And that's eugenics? That's looking for the links. And when I've looked at, the different people talking in this, and really crazy DARPA people and, different people really talking under Bayer Monsanto moonshots, talking about, CRISPRing and editing humans. So we don't get colds anymore and we don't get diseases. And, there's stuff in the psychiatry that you can CRISPR and genetically alter people so they don't get mental health issues, So I'm like, this is really bad news, the eugenics stuff, even just on that level, which which just people need to become more aware about. So that's why I interviewed Mark, because I really think eugenics is core to even to the way they think about us, even to the way we're thought about. So it's something deficient in you that needs to be intervened in.
I think that.
Yeah,
I
sorry.
was just gonna say, I think they think the vast majority of us are disposable. But you're gonna say.
Yeah. And the food, they can do whatever they want with the food with this they've got open slather now to put anything they want in the food, and we won't be aware under this, if this proposal, which the food body wants to put through, and the people in Australia are going to have to push back really hard to stop it. It's Australia, New Zealand, and we don't have much GMO in Australia and New Zealand, so this is massive.
And even here in Mexico, it's not as good. I mean, it takes more work. You got to go to the market, but even if you go to the big supermarket, and I've seen this shift over the years. Virtually, you go down the aisle, like pretty much there's nothing I can purchase here. Only in the vegetable section, and even some of that stuff is starting to get questionable as well. So it's beginning to become very difficult. I did also want to, I was going to bring up, you mentioned schools and the collection of DNA. I think that's important. I think I never took a PCR test, and I think part of the PCR test thing was related to DNA or eventual training us for this process maybe later on. The CDC admitted on its Twitter. I have this posted somewhere in my feeds. If people go to my Telegram channel, it's better. Actually, Telegram in that sense is better than X, Twitter, because in Telegram you can just type in the search term and it'll pop right up from the history. Where even the CDC, I think, posted at least 10% of the PCR tests DNA was sent off to some laboratory I saw in China in past years. They even admitted that the government created some healthcare to get people to do blood tests, and then ultimately that was to get their DNA. And then there was a story I posted a while back from a school in Kansas. Spyware turned this Kansas high school into a red zone of dystopian surveillance. And basically it said that if a word or an image triggers an alert in the AI software, the result could range from the student being sent to an administrator to being referred to online counseling to get a visit from local police. It's absolutely insane. And so what are there any other, we're touching on all these different elements. Are there any sort of other vectors here that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, what you're saying about that, with the children at school and being able to trawl through the AI, that's in for the government to protect children on social media. They're proposing that. So they're going to start putting this all through children, like they're trawling, they'll have an AI looking at assessing what they're looking at, and then there will be interventions. It talks about that in a paper that's done by one of the massive philanthropy companies in Australia. Education's just going to be like, pretty much a teacher's just going to be told what to do through AI. And then the, interventions will be that there'll be alerts about certain children through the AI that intervention needs to happen in them. Then you get the social worker or the NGO come in and start working with these child or children being told what to do through AI. The real sense of actual getting to know students, or, a therapist getting to know their client, or it's all gone. It's all just, you have to follow a certain way because you have to show the outcomes, and you have to do it a certain way so the philanthropists can make their money off it. So we've got a lot more data collection about to come through in Australia, and it's something I need to look at more. To be able to do this amount of collecting people into these impact markets, they need huge amounts of data on people because they need to justify at the end. So they need to justify the market in the first place, setting up the market, but they have to justify that the philanthropists can get paid. So there is a lot more around data collection going through in Australia. They're changing the data collection laws and the privacy laws. Just everything they say is strengthening. They're strengthening the data collection laws, and so that's a whole bunch more to look at, but they're going to make it so they have all our data, and it's very much compiled so they can make a market of people. So that's really big as well in Australia.
I mean, it's a war as peace. So they're strengthening the privacy. They're weakening the privacy. laws. And I used to be a teacher, high school. Well, I taught everything from like fifth grade to high school to university, and I could ultimately see them, doing away with physical teachers and even schools. And you just, if anyone remembers that, one of my favorite, I love the sci-fi genre, Fallout 3, the video game of the post-apocalyptic world. And I think kids just go on the computers. And I mean, there is a lot of advanced technology, but ultimately, I think they could do away with. I mean, not that I would recommend that. I'm just saying that they could get away with sort of getting rid of teachers and having just kids do tablets and whatever, AI, VR, Neuralink chip in your head.
And it's like people think that they can homeschool, and I've been trying to alert the homeschooling community that they're now going in and they've got a task force in Queensland looking at the homeschooling. And I looked at the woman who's heading it up, and she's part of all global curriculum and, data collection strategies, social emotional learning. And I've been trying to alert people. So I'm really trying to alert people to the social emotional learning wellbeing agenda. It's quite tricky because I think it sounds so okay that people just doesn't get on people's radar, no matter how much I talk about it. But basically, it's going to be the government with their or the private corporations and the philanthropists being the ones who assess what's a child's well-being. And it's a nebulous term. It's super nebulous. It's not defined. It's like, oh, it depends on all these factors. So no longer will the parents have that sense of, I know my child's doing well and this is what I want for my child and this is the culture of our family. It'll be external. And they're talking about pre-birth, intervening pre-birth in this arena. So yeah, it is something I would love parents to start paying attention to, because right now in schools, children are filling out wellbeing surveys every single week, and parents are letting them. And we actually can say no. So if parents just said no, I know this is part of a bigger arena. We could get somewhere there. But in Australia, they've also recently released the Strengthening Democracy paper, which has just got philanthropists all through it. From memory, it kind of is like this sort of soothing 15 pages, and then suddenly you get hit in the face with domestic terrorism. If you don't trust the government, you're more likely to be a domestic terrorist. It's like a page 15 in. So there's this whole, if people don't trust the government, there's going to be a lot around social cohesion, what they're doing around social cohesion. And that's also going to be paid for and financed for profit model by philanthropists. So how are we socially cohesive? I think that's going to be massive, because if you're not socially cohesive, you're a threat to democracy. That's how it's being framed.
Yeah, I watched over the weekend recording of a prophecy conference. I'm a huge fan of Canadian Carl Teichgrupp, who will be coming on the podcast next month. And he goes to all these UN conferences and he talks about there's this huge one world religion element. And he's literally been going to those conferences, and he showed a PowerPoint, a slide, where at first they called, and specifically they targeted the religious, specifically the Christians. And he said, over time, the term was they were extremist, authoritarian, and he says it seems like it's gonna end up as terrorist. Basically, they're gonna consider you a terrorist. And you mentioned homeschool. In some countries, it's not allowed, or they're bringing in more restrictions. Here in Mexico, where I am, we're homeschooling, and for now, it's kind of like you can do whatever you want. So we don't have problems with that as regards the government. But as you say, there's the other problem of the material, right? And when I was teaching, things like mindfulness were beginning to come in, which I'm not down with from my biblical worldview, but because I view it as it's this sort of New Age theosophic agenda, which goes together with what you mentioned, the inner development goals. I've been to a meeting of Lucid Trust, Lucifer Publishing in Geneva. They believe Lucifer is the Christ. And so there's all this agenda there. I've interviewed, I'm sure you're familiar with Lisa Logan, who does great work on SEL. I had her on my TNT show a couple times, my former TNT show. And so she touches a lot on that. I always ask, two questions when it comes to solutions. One is what to do in terms of resistance or pushing back, but also how to sort of survive in this system, because in some ways I feel like this trajectory is inevitable. from a prophetic biblical worldview. And so we want to keep pushing back. We want to keep resisting as much as we can. But then if they break through the lines, okay, we got to fall back. How do we survive going forward? And so your sort of thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's really hard. Like when I put my articles out, because I'm just showing what the government's doing, and I do get a lot of, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And my whole thing where I've been putting my energy for the last 3 years, so I'm pretty new to all of this arena. It's like 3 years ago or 4 years ago. I was just like, I need to understand what's happening in the world. And I started to look. And I wish I'd known earlier, because there's so much to learn. I'd love to just be able to know huge chunks of areas, especially, the financial, systems and everything else. There's plenty of stuff I haven't got to. But my whole thing is just trying to get an awareness based on Australia, because Australians seem to share a lot about America. And I'm like, but lots happening here, and we just don't have enough eyes on it. And so that's part of what I'm trying to do at the moment. The more people can talk to their neighbours and talk to the communities. Like, I do think in Australia, they've got a thin veneer of democracy. So I've been like, okay, well, the more people know and push back, that might sort of, they might have to sort of slow it down a bit. But the issue that we've got there is they're doing mass migration, as they are everywhere. And that means that your numbers of people who potentially could push back weaken. That's how I see that playing out. So, so you're not going to get newly arrived people jumping on the bandwagon. They're going to be establishing themselves and making a home for themselves. They're just not going to be in the headspace or know the history or know the culture. So we've got that issue with that. But I just think I'm actually see it more like a process now. I was really frightened for about a year. I'm sure I'll potentially be frightened again. I'm not saying I won't, but I see it as where is my heart? Where am I sitting? What's happening in my mind? Am I trying? Am I doing what I can do? Am I having the right, the conversations? So I just sort of take it back to what's actually within my hands at the moment that I can do something about. And that keeps me sane. I mean, this is a wild ride, isn't it? It's going to be a wild ride.
And the craziest thing is what you mentioned earlier. I mean, just in the physical spaces around me, online, a lot of us come together on these podcasts and other platforms to talk about this, but virtually no one around us has any clue at all as to what is happening. And it's shocking. Like, when this stuff really starts to come online, it's I don't know, it's going to be really hell on earth. It's going to be like the 1930s, 40s again, except, back then it was Jews. Today it's Palestinians. What's people talk about how the Gazans and have been treated. A lot of Israel has used a lot of that technology, almost like prototyping these surveillance algorithm ghetto states. Some people talk about China as being another laboratory, but especially in the West now, they're accelerating the game. And so, and any other thought for us?
Look, I was trying a couple of years ago. I just sort of thought I knew it was the lull before the storm. I knew that COVID just opened the door, but I felt like a lot of people at that time. So I was trying to get people active and really looking at what's happening in government plans and, let's sort of get prepared so we can have the en masse on the ground and be ready. But I actually found that very difficult because I think a lot of people wanted to relax. Or, got caught in just the COVID narrative. And it was like, but they're building everything right now, this is so, yeah, it's so I did have one idea and it didn't work. So, like I've now I'm sort of regrouping a little bit as to what might work in the future and how to dodge and weave around it as much as possible. My whole mission, I guess, is to extend the amount of time before I get caught in it. However that is, just be on my toes. And that's part of why I look as much as I do, because I'm just hoping that, and then I want to share that, I would be looking and not share, I'd be looking and researching everything I am, but I share it because I think it might be of use, to people as well. But otherwise, it's more like, okay, so just to understand as much as possible, and there might be ways of where can you live for longer, without this enforcement upon you, and where's the so I guess that's all I'm thinking right now. And I do encourage people, like when people say, what can I do? I'm like, well, I've got videos, I've got, like when they're talking about what I'm raising, and I just say, well, I've got videos, I've got, Substacks, I've got articles. You can either learn it for yourself and give a talk in your local community, or show a video of mine, or just, or somebody else. But I think everyone needs to get active, whatever that is for them. I do think we need to engage with this.
Yeah, and in whatever way, everyone's doing something different, and kind of what you alluded to just now. I think I sort of get bothered. I still see people posting 4 or 5 years later now about PCR tests and Carrie Melissa or whatever, and it's just like, guys, like, how many times? Like, I've never taken a PCR test. We know that's a fraud. They're literally building the smart city around us, like right now. Can we stop talking about the PCR tests and Carrie Mullins and whatever? And it's the hour is super late. And what you just said, my biggest thing is trying to survive the longest in the Maze Runner in the Hunger Games, because we're in it now, and that's your instinct, survival instincts to. And people, I guess the only thing that I can think of is get out of the city, buy some plot of land, some water and food, and that'll last you longer than if you're in the city when they shut off your financial account.
You'd have to work out where there's no critical minerals, where there's no where they're going to put renewable energy right through your land and acquire your land. You'd have to work out a number of things within that in Australia.
Yeah, Australia seems a bit tougher than other places. That's why people are coming to Latin America or other parts of Asia. And so, all right, well, I think if people listen to this podcast before they go to sleep, they'll be having nightmares. But where's the best place to find you? I think it's principally your Substack, and you've also got a Telegram.
It is. I will have a website up, but it's taking forever, where I just group everything together. But yes, Substack. So it's just Kate Mason, just Substack, and it's easy to come up. And then I have YouTube as well. But if you go on Substack, you can see the YouTube. It's hard to find me on YouTube, so it's better just to go through my Substack articles.
All right. Well, keep up the great work, Kate. And what do they say in the Hunger Games? May the odds ever be in your favor.
Yeah, same to you. Thank you. Thank you for talking to me from Mexico.